Press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. In the next half hour then, we will see what's making the headlines with the former Labour Party advisor, Ayesha Hazarika, and the Sun's political editor, Tom Newton-Dunn. Welcome, good to see both of you.
Good evening.
Front pages then, as ever. Should we take a look at those first of all? The Eye says that tensions are laid bare among cabinet members over competing plans for Brexit. The Times has the same story, saying May's top team splits over Brexit. The Metro reflects on the despair for the parents of baby Charlie Gard as his last appeal is lost. Same story for The Mirror with the headline, The Final Heartbreak. The Financial Times says there are potentially far-reaching consequences to transatlantic relations over Brussels' huge fine for Google. The Telegraph says there are now new fears over a bank crash because of the rise of easy and cheap credit. The Guardian says decades of social mobility policies have failed to reduce inequality between the rich and the poor in the UK. The Express says millions of workers are sleepwalking towards a poverty-stricken retirement, while the Daily Mail is incredulous about human rights laws, citing the case of 2 Romanian prisoners who can't be sent to their home country because their jail cells are too small. So let's get the thoughts of Ayesha Hazarika and Tom Newton-Dunn. Put my teeth back in. And you want to start with the supposed cabinet chaos on Brexit in the Eye and the Times.
Yes, there's nothing supposed about it. Okay. It really is cabinet chaos, and it's official. And I suppose an event like today was really always going to happen when suddenly you have a Prime Minister who loses almost all of her authority. The big beasts underneath her, namely, and you have them there, Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, and David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, plus there's another one, Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, all start rising up. And,
no, it's not the pigeon.
It's not the pigeon. It's a wing and a prayer, which is quite appropriate in terms of Brexit.
Well, I think she thinks the Foreign Secretary's a pigeon. But what happened today was these tensions over difference in nuances and also serious and huge differences in policy on how Brexit will happen bubbled over. And Philip Hammond has been very strident ever since the general election itself, laying out his far more business-friendly, jobs-friendly vision of Brexit. And I suppose what happened today was David Davis finally lost his rag and started hitting back. And talking at a Times Business Summit, made some extraordinarily provocative remarks about the Chancellor, accused him of inconsistency. And this all really came to a head at the afternoon Number 10 lobby briefing session to political hacks like me, where the Prime Minister was asked on whose side does she sit, David Davis or Philip Hammond. And she came down quite interestingly, noticeably towards, not all the way, but towards the side of Philip Hammond, her Chancellor, which will again cause yet further ruptures.
Which practically means what for Brexit, though? I suppose that's the next question, isn't it?
Well, I think he wants to put the economy first. Philip Hammond has been quite consistent since the Conservative Party conference last autumn. He said, look, nobody who voted for Brexit voted to be poorer. He's always very clear that he has put jobs and growth in the economy forefront at his plans for Brexit. Now, things could have been very different if Theresa May had got an increased majority. There was lots of talk and rumour and speculation that Philip Hammond was going to be out because he is a much more of a kind of, he's a soft Brexiteer, but he looks like he is flexing his muscle now. I think there are serious concerns about you know, what do you prioritise? Do you prioritise party interests first, or do you put the economy first? He's very clear about what he thinks, and it's going to be interesting about how this plays out between them all. I mean, interestingly, Philip Hammond has also been getting a bit more muscular. He's had a pop at Boris Johnson's phrase, kind of having cake and eating it, and saying you can't do that. So we are going to end up at some kind of either a row or some sort of impasse about what takes priority on all of this.
This all comes down, and here's where we get into the weeds, to the customs union, which of course is the thing that allows us to trade freely all around Europe. And really, we're now talking about the transitional deal. So the entire government agree we're going to leave the customs union, because only by leaving the customs union can we then go and strike all these free trade deals all over the world, allegedly. But the transition stage is what happens between being in the customs union and the EU and the single market and being out of it altogether. Now, Philip Hammond says this needs to go on for a rather long time, because the longer it goes on, then the less the cliff edge will be, and it crucially gives British business time to adapt. And that's the voice that the noise that British business have been screaming out for as well. David Davis said, no, two things he said today. First of all, we will be out of the customs union full stop the second we leave the EU at the stroke of midnight on the 30th of March 2019, and any transitional arrangement will be outside of the customs union, and also any transitional arrangement will only last between 1 and 2 years. And the timing for that is crucial, because he says, and he believes and said this today, that the government need to be out of the entire EU and transitional deal before the next general election, which he slightly optimistically thinks could be as late as 2022, an entire 5-year parliament. Good luck to him on that. So Hammond is obviously very different. He says, no, we've got to stay in the customs union for as long as possible to allow British business.
If I get into the weeds even more, apologies, Ayesha, the transitional arrangements that are required are, for example, building massive warehouses at Calais so that goods can be sorted and checked. That's the sort of thing that needs to happen if we are out of the customs union, is that right? You need to have warehouses in different places because there might be delays as things pass through borders, and, you know, that level of complexity? Or
that certainly becomes part of it. To be honest, it's not even physical things. It is simply, if you go from no tariffs at all on trade with the EU and no barriers restricting services from people applying their trade anywhere, to suddenly big tariffs, 5, 10, 20, 30% on various different things, that is hugely disruptive for business. Philip Hammond made a speech in Berlin today where he was very rude about Boris Johnson to say, well, what on earth is this going to do to a company's contract? They've got a contract for 5 years to sell widgets. Suddenly, they've got to add 30% to their costs. So he is saying the smooth the transition as possible. If you imagine a slope, rather than doing that, which causes catastrophe to business, you have a very, very smooth slope, allow business to adapt and move very, very seamlessly into the new period.
And we are a year in and we're still not worked out what this Brexit means. Well, Brexit malarkey is all about.
Street spokeswoman has said, look, what that phase of implementation may look like is a matter for negotiation. Everything has a forward lean in terms of the truth is we don't really know what's going to happen. I suspect Philip Hammond's stance will be much more popular. OK, within a certain section of his party it won't, but I think across the whole of the House of Commons, the numbers are much bigger for a kind of a more gentle transition period with lots of time for businesses to adjust, to make their case, because it's not just as Tom was saying, the hard goods and services, it's the other things, it's the movement. We have lots of industries where actually lots of people go over, and all of that stuff needs to be sorted out.
And Labour's current policy on it is what? I was slightly getting confused.
Now, there's a good question. Can you tell us?
Well, I think Brexit means Brexit.
That's a no.
Should we move on?
But to be fair, I mean, I don't think anybody has a very clear position on this yet, because I think until
you're just about to tell us about Labour's position.
Well, I don't think anyone has a clear position. Labour is not negotiating this because Labour is not in government.
Sit this one out for 2 years.
Well, they're not going to sit this one out. Actually, I think Jeremy Corbyn's position in the election was actually quite a good position, which was, look, we respect the mandate of the people, but we're going to try and fight for something that doesn't kill off jobs, which exactly is the same position as the Chancellor, Philip Hammond.
Which is why I asked the question.
What does that mean in practice?
It means pretty much Philip Hammond's position, I reckon.
Right. I reckon. We're not sure. We'll find out.
I'm not actually in the shadow cabinet. I don't know if you've realised. I'm not actually in the shadow cabinet.
In the meantime, Brussels has been flexing its muscles, not least over Google and its positioning of its own shopping suggestions.
What's Labour's position on Google?
Well, this is a really important story. This fine is absolutely huge. There have been lots of concerns about Google's dominance. It is the biggest search engine. It's a verb in our life. We do Google literally every hour of every day. They have found that they did abuse their search options. They were promoting their own sort of marketing and sales, and they've come down pretty hard on them. Look, it's still going to probably be quite a drop in the ocean for Google because the profits are massive, but I think it is important that Brussels has flexed its muscle on this. Lots of people are concerned about these big new technology companies, Google, Facebook, these are the new huge platforms.
Not least newspapers, of course.
Well, yeah, absolutely, but also they harbour a lot of our personal information. They have vast amounts of power, the amount of data they collect on all of us, and also they're quite of the EU.
And on that very point, you'll find, if you were to buy The Sun tomorrow,
yes,
overwhelmingly positive and delighted editorial in our paper saying, "Well done, EU, what a brilliant job you've done here." And it does raise the reasonably fair point that actually there aren't many things in the world big enough to take on the likes of Google and Facebook any longer, because they are so big and so powerful, and a small shake of the Google and Facebook tail can take away billions and huge amounts of jobs from countries. So there is potentially, you can now see a role for something like the EU. When you have 27, 28 countries ganging up together, suddenly you can speak with one voice and you can take on
But Tom, doesn't that make your paper think actually the EU is quite a good thing and can do good things?
That's the subject we haven't got time to talk about.
On this, yes.
Yes, on this, yes. There we go. Very quickly, Nicola Sturgeon is there. She's on the front page of The Guardian as well, or the story is at least. Second referendum ditched for...
Nicola Sturgeon made a very foolhardy political gamble. She tried to use Brexit to leverage in another second referendum for Scotland. And the people of Scotland just didn't want it. The appetite was just not there. People were still kind of reeling after the last referendum. We've just had this election. People want to see what happens with Brexit.
It's only shelved for now, though, isn't it?
It's shelved for now.
She's left it on the table.
She has left it on the table, but I think to do it after Brexit, I mean, look, if it was down to me, I'd just say, look, take the whole thing off the table. We've had the referendum.
Does it leave uncertainty?
Of sort of,
well, the clue's in the
British
title
politics.
of her party name.
Well, but she also is the First Minister of Scotland, and there's lots of other problems in Scotland. Literacy rates have been going down. There's lots of concerns about kind of education. All the same public service issues in Scotland are still there. And I think
10 years in power.
What people want is for her to focus on the day job and not faff around with independence.
And this is something right, Theresa May made a royal mess of the general election, and Brexit's not looking so pretty either anymore. But actually, on independence, if you are a unionist and you believe in the United Kingdom sticking together, you have to give it to Theresa May and Ruth Davidson. They really have smashed her to pieces on this one. They forced her into full-scale retreat. Politicians really don't like using words like reset. It means U-turn. And though Nicola Sturgeon is now committed to having to go for a second indie ref, as we call it, and the reason for that is rather obvious, because in 2021, the next Scottish Parliament elections come up, where if the electoral trajectory continues as it was in the last general election, Nicola Sturgeon is going to lose any majority at all for a Scottish independence. She simply will not be able to vote it through, and she might even lose power, who knows. So she has to make another crack at it, but it is very hard now to see how on earth she'll make that case. It can only be via some sort of seismic change in Brexit, or Brexit going wrong, and therefore, I mean, she desperately needs now a brand new excuse, which she currently doesn't have.
OK. Plenty more still to come, including how a trip to Glastonbury might just have landed Jon Snow in hot water. Back with that in just a moment. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me this evening, Ayesha Hazarika and Tom Newton-Dunn. Some very painful pictures to look at in front of the Daily Mirror and elsewhere as well, which is this final appeal to save the life of Charlie Gard, despite the hospital thinking that he should be allowed to die with dignity. And in fact, that is how the courts have finally ruled. Yeah,
this is an absolutely heartbreaking story. In fact, I think we were on before, actually, when it was the last sort of legal round on this, and they have lost their final bid. So if he slips away, the hospital will not revive him now. And I think for everybody involved in this, obviously the parents, but also the people looking after him in the hospital as well, it has just been the most heartbreaking case. Nobody wants to see any wee boy or their family go through anything.
And many parents sit there thinking, why do the courts and the doctors have the final decision over my baby and I as a parent do not?
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, these cases are always notoriously hard to know where the line is, where the rights are. And, you know, it's just incredibly tragic. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer to this, to be honest. I'm sure if you're the parent, you would want to just keep fighting and fighting and fighting. But the hospital also has a view in terms of what is the right thing to do.
Yeah, and Charlie Gard now will be offered palliative care, we're told, which is, you know, tragic for his parents, who, of course, raised so much money with crowdfunding, didn't
Yeah, extremely sad. And, you know, the battle all along has been, you know, who decides a child's life, the parents or the courts? And yet again, the parents are lost, and there are very good reasons why poor Charlie shouldn't be put through any more pain, which is what the courts have obviously decided. But it's one of those incredibly tough moral dilemmas.
Yeah. Metro also leading on that. No hope for baby Charlie as well. Parents despair as they lose final court appeal. Inside the papers to the inside of the Times. A couple of stories there. Public opinion is turning on austerity and tax rises.
Yeah,
it's both things, is it? Right.
Well, I thought this was really interesting because obviously austerity was a massive fault line in the election. I actually felt austerity was a bigger election issue than Brexit. Well, certainly when I was going around the country and talking to people on the doorstep, more people brought up austerity than they did Brexit.
Well, we all want lots of spending, don't we? We just don't want to have to pay for it. So
well, also,
that's why we're against both of them.
People feel that when it's doctors and, well, particularly nurses and firefighters and public sector workers that are local councils that are having the hits, why is it we can always find money for other things? But the interesting thing about this is the latest British social attitude survey, and it says that only 29% want cuts in public spending, and that's down from 35% 10 years ago and 43% in 1996.
Yeah.
I've written this very same story up for my paper tomorrow, and the headline's a bit misleading, actually. People are now very much interested in more spending and more tax to be paid.
OK, right. That's not quite what that headline says, because that headline says we need to borrow more money, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, ask anyone, do you want your taxes to go up?
Tax rises as well.
I'll probably say no, but what's going on quite
clearly...
Never
vote for taxes, do you?
The general British public is shifting left. They are, and they want also a lot more state intervention. They want the government to start spending more money to create jobs. Interesting, if you look into all this, though, precisely where they are, this is not some, you know, Faustian return to 1970s or, you know, Michael Foot style, you know, hard left socialism. It actually takes the country back to the sort of views they held in the 1990s. So we're going back to sort of Blair era type views, very sort of comparative sort of figures.
I completely agree with Tom. I mean, this stuff is not, oh my goodness, crazy left-wing stuff. The biggest issue that came up was actually cuts to the education and schools budget. When parents are getting letters from their teachers, from their classes saying, can you give us some money for stuff in the classroom? Then you think, hang on, this is not really going so well.
We'll perhaps talk about that next time. We did tease this very, very quickly in like 10 seconds. Jon Snow, Glastonbury.
Tremendous story. Jon Snow goes to Glastonbury, gets caught, drinks or takes something he shouldn't have, and says, F the Tories.
He may have been completely sober.
Well, you don't know that.
I do know that because he actually...
You don't know that.
He said, I do know that because he said today, I was in such a state, I have no idea what I said, I can't remember a thing about it.
Oh, well, let's hope he had a lovely time.
Now demanding the sack. You'd never do that, would you, Anna? No. Go to Glastonbury and say rude words.
No, I'd love to go to Glastonbury if there's a ticket available for next year. The weather is next. I'll see you at 11. So Wednesday will be a cloudy and wet day for much of England, Wales, Ireland and Northern Ireland. Scotland, though, mostly dry with some brighter spells.